Imagine waking up tomorrow and suddenly discovering that you are entirely trapped inside your own mind. You want to be happy, but you literally can't. You want to stop worrying, but your brain simply won't let you. You desperately want to focus, but your thoughts just keep running away from you. You even try to trust your own reality, but reality itself is starting to feel incredibly uncertain. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the fascinating and honestly often deeply misunderstood inner workings of the human mind. Let's dive right in.
Today, we're mapping out exactly how these invisible conditions completely rewire the way people think, feel, and experience life itself. We're going to see firsthand why mental illness is far, far more complicated than simply being sad or overthinking.
So, let's start with extremes of emotion. What happens when the volume dial of your feelings is completely broken?
Look, everyday sadness usually has a clear reason, right? But depression, it often doesn't. Think about it. Your absolute favorite movie is playing, your favorite food is sitting right in front of you, your friends are calling you to hang out. Everything that used to bring you joy is right there, and yet you feel absolutely nothing. It's literally like watching your own life through a dirty window. It isn't just crying all day, it's this profound, draining numbness. Your energy just vanishes. Simply getting out of bed feels like climbing Mount Everest. And you know what the most dangerous part is? It slowly starts whispering to you that this empty, heavy feeling is just who you are now.
But what if that emotional volume dial gets cranked the exact opposite way? Let's talk about bipolar disorder, which introduces a state called mania. Imagine having just unlimited energy. You barely sleep, your confidence goes through the roof, and ideas are just constantly flooding your mind. You feel entirely unstoppable. I mean, it sounds kind of incredible, right? But here's the catch. This extreme high almost always leads to incredibly risky, impulsive decisions, and it is always, inevitably, followed by an exhausting, devastating crash right back down into that deep depression we just talked about. It is a relentless, exhausting, emotional roller coaster.
And speaking of that volume dial, that perfectly illustrates borderline personality disorder. Just imagine feeling every single emotion at absolute maximum volume. A delayed text message doesn't just make you wonder if they're busy, it feels like total abandonment. A minor disagreement doesn't just frustrate you, it feels entirely crushing. Now, people on the outside might just see these big, dramatic reactions, but what they aren't seeing is the massive emotional hurricane happening underneath the surface. It makes navigating relationships and the fear of rejection just incredibly overwhelming.
Moving on to a brain on overdrive, when the mind's alarm system never turns off.
Okay, so normally your brain's alarm system only rings when there's an actual fire, right? But with generalized anxiety disorder, that alarm is basically stuck on. It never turns off. You are constantly agonizing over money, school, health, future problems that haven't even happened yet. And the physical toll? It's intense. We're talking sweaty hands, a racing heartbeat, tense muscles, stomach pain, sheer exhaustion. It is exactly like living your entire life carrying an invisible backpack full of heavy bricks.
And sometimes, that alarm system doesn't just hum in the background. It absolutely explodes out of nowhere. This is panic disorder. Picture this. You're just sitting quietly at home. Nothing dangerous is happening at all. Then, bam, your heart explodes into a full sprint. Your chest gets incredibly tight. You can't catch your breath, and you are hit with the total, utter conviction that you are dying right then and there. Physically, you're completely healthy. But the brain has accidentally triggered a massive, full-blown emergency response. It creates this terrifying fear of fear itself, which causes people's worlds to shrink as they desperately try to avoid anywhere an attack might strike. Now, let's contrast those normal, everyday nerves with social anxiety disorder. Getting nervous before giving a big speech is totally normal, but imagine feeling that exact same paralyzing level of sheer terror during everyday, basic interactions. Meeting someone new, ordering food at a restaurant, just making a phone call. Social anxiety warps everyday situations into massive threats. Your brain becomes entirely obsessed with judgment. And it's not that these folks dislike people, not at all. It's that they are absolutely terrified of being judged, scrutinized, or humiliating themselves. Now, when the brain's attention filters misfire, we see conditions like ADHD. Think of it like this. 1 second, you're reading a book. 5 seconds in, a bird flies past the window. 10 seconds, your phone buzzes. 15 seconds, you're suddenly reliving a super embarrassing memory from 3 years ago. 20 seconds, you're thinking about pizza. Here's the thing. ADHD is not a lack of attention. Folks with ADHD can actually focus intensely for hours on end. The struggle is regulating that focus and choosing what actually gets the spotlight. Doing a boring task feels physically impossible.
So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that these individuals are not lazy. In reality, they're working twice as hard just to keep up with their own runaway thoughts.
Next up, the struggle for control. Misguided tools the brain uses to try and regain safety.
What if the door isn't locked? I mean, what if you checked it wrong? Most of us check a lock, shrug, and move on with our day. Someone with OCD literally cannot. Their brain just keeps asking, keeping them trapped in that moment. To try and dial down this intense, crushing anxiety, they perform rituals, washing their hands over and over, checking locks, counting steps. And sure, the ritual provides a brief, fleeting moment of relief, but then the cycle inevitably restarts. OCD is not some quirky desire to keep your desk neat. It is an inescapable, endless loop of fear.
We also see the brain desperately trying to protect us in PTSD. Think about surviving literally the worst day of your entire life. Now imagine that months, even years later, your brain still firmly believes you are in immediate life-threatening danger. That traumatic memory gets stuck. A completely random sound, a smell, or an object can trigger a massive survival response way after the actual danger has passed. Your heart starts racing, your body prepares to fight or flee, even if you're just sitting safely in your living room. PTSD isn't a sign of weakness. It is the brain's incredibly misguided, hyper-vigilant attempt to protect you from something it just never fully recovered from.
And you know, this frantic search for control often manifests physically, which is exactly what we see in eating disorders. To an outsider, the solution seems so obvious, right? Just eat. But guys, eating disorders have almost nothing to do with actual food. Whether we're talking about anorexia or bulimia, these are intense, agonizing internal mental battles centered around control, self-worth, deep fear, perfectionism, and serious emotional pain. That battle is raging inside the mind long before you ever see it physically on the body.
Which brings us to when reality shifts, the downright terrifying inability to trust your own senses.
Schizophrenia is hands down one of the most heavily stigmatized and deeply misunderstood disorders out there. Hollywood loves to portray people with schizophrenia as these dangerous villains, but the reality is so different. These individuals are not dangerous. They are simply struggling, desperately, to differentiate what is real from what isn't. They might hear voices or see things that other people just don't. Seriously, consider the sheer terror of not being able to trust your own thoughts, your own eyes, your own ears. That is the true, exhausting daily reality of schizophrenia.
And then, in cases of trauma so severe the brain literally cannot process it, we see dissociative identity disorder, or DID. Instead of processing that immense pain normally, the brain comes up with this ultimate extreme survival strategy. It actually separates parts of the person's identity. Different identity states step in to hold different memories, emotions, and experiences, just to create some distance from the overwhelming trauma. It is absolutely not a ploy for attention. It is entirely for protection. It remains one of the rarest and arguably most misunderstood psychological survival mechanisms in existence. Finally, let's talk about the human behind the diagnosis: biology, complex illnesses, and unseen battles.
Well, let's get one thing absolutely straight. Mental disorders are not character flaws. They aren't laziness, and they are definitely not a sign of weakness. These are incredibly complex biological conditions involving genetics, brain chemistry, environment, and trauma. Think about it. If a person has a sick heart, we can usually see the physical symptoms pretty clearly, but a sick brain? It affects the invisible stuff, your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior, and that makes these illnesses incredibly, tragically difficult to see in the people walking right next to us.
Just picture walking down a crowded city street. Thousands of people passing by. They're smiling, they're chatting, grabbing coffee, just living their lives. On the outside, they look completely fine. But silently, right behind those smiles, some of them are fighting absolutely desperate, invisible battles just to survive the day. Anxiety, deep depression, unprocessed PTSD. The absolute truth is, mental illness rarely looks like what you expect it to. Very often, the strongest-looking people you know are the ones carrying the absolute heaviest burdens. Which leaves us with this final thought. Behind every single diagnosis, behind every single symptom we've mapped out in this explainer today, there is just a human being trying their very best to survive. The human brain is the most powerful object in the known universe, and frankly, we are still just barely scratching the surface of how it works. So I want to leave you with this question. If the brain really is the most powerful object in the universe, how much grace should we give the folks whose brains are actively fighting against them? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this gave you a powerful new perspective, and I highly encourage you to carry this empathy forward into the real world.